To get to top 1% of all chess players, you need to get to 2000 elo on chess.com, and it's simpler than you might think. The truth is, most people fail because they don't follow a clear and proven system. In this video, I'm gonna share with you the exact thinking process that has helped many of my students to cross 2000 elo often faster than they expected. This strategy works from the very first move up to the final checkmate, and if you start applying it today, you're gonna see the difference in your very next game. It's your turn to join the elite. What's up, chess player, and welcome to the Journey to Grandmaster, the place where you can improve every single aspect of your chess game. I'm gonna play against Francis, who is a 2300 rated chess.com bot, which is roughly 2100 in the real life. So if you can beat Francis, then you are good enough to join the top 1% of chess players. And while I'm playing, I'm gonna share with you the exact system that you need to use in your own games to beat your opponents and to get to such a level. So the first question you have to ask yourself, and then the first challenge you need to solve, whether you play e4 or d4. I would recommend you play d4 if you want to join 1% of the top chess players. Why? Because it's so much simpler for you to play here d4. You don't need to memorize so many openings like you need to do if you play e4. There is e5, there is Sicilian defense, Caracan defense, French defense, and so much more. And you have different opportunities there, different types of positions, so you need to learn so much. Whereas in the d4, you can rely more on your understanding of the position. It's not that difficult. Of course, there is still some theoretical variations, but I'm gonna show you here the opening that does not require you to learn that much. You rather understand the key ideas, and then you're good to go. So what are the three key opening goals that you absolutely must focus on if you want to join the top 1%? It should be developing all of your pieces. It should be fighting for the center. It's very, very important because who controls the center controls the flow of the game. And that is why you play either d4 or e4, because you want to immediately fight for the center. Next, you want to bring every single one of your pieces into the game. You have to do it as fast as possible and as active as possible. To achieve that, you have the golden principle of one piece, one move. You never want to spend more than one move on each piece without a huge necessity. You always prefer to bring a new piece into the game. Like, for example, if you are a football coach, you want to bring all of your players into the playing field. You don't want any of them sitting there on the bench waiting for some events happening. No, you want every single one of your stars to participate. So that is why I'm playing here g3, and I want to place this bishop on g2, where it's going to be very active along the long diagonal. Okay, my opponent is actually repeating all of my moves, which is interesting, but normally it's not such a great strategy if he's playing as black, so he always has one tempo less. So I don't recommend you repeat all of your opponent's moves. And I also don't recommend you play that knight to c6, because even though he is developing a new piece, he's not really fighting for the center. It was better to maybe play c5 before playing knight c6, so that he applies some pressure on the center. This way, he does not have a lot of space for his pieces, and yeah, it's going to be difficult for him to continue. But let's see what he has in mind. For you, you don't really care. Like, the real challenge is not only to know those golden three principles. It's not enough to get to top 1%. The real challenge is to implement it regardless of what your opponent does to stop you, because he's not stupid, right? He wants you not to control the center. He doesn't want you to develop all of your pieces. And the third principle that you absolutely must follow in every single one of your games is to secure your king. Bring it to the safety zone before you go all in into the attack and try to destroy your opponent. That's exactly what I did here on g1. Like, castles is the best instrument. You have to bring your king into the safety zone. It's not like a strict rule that you must always castle, because sometimes it happens that the king is most secure in the center. I mean, it's crazy, but it happens. In most of the cases, you do want to castle because here the king has some defenders, and now you can fight in the center, for example, to create some difficulties for your opponent. So how do I achieve that? I still have time till my opponent finishes his development, make sure that his king is secure. So maybe I want to attack here in the center and play c4, but I really need to calculate that a little bit, because that is a pawn sacrifice. You just don't want to give up your material without any reasons to do so. Or I can continue my development, for example, bring my bishop here to f4 or to g5, but you always try to choose the most active square, and you want every single one of your pieces to perform a useful function. You don't want any unemployment going on in your camp. So I'm thinking here about the move c4. I guess if he takes, then this diagonal is going to be open for me, and I'm going to have two central pawns there, which would be also very helpful. So yes, I can sacrifice it because my opponent is behind in terms of the development, and I need to use this momentum to create some difficulties, to apply some pressure. Okay, he castles. Now I can take on d5, but not necessarily want to exchange, because that means your opponent is going to go forward and he is going to be active there. Although in this case, after takes and takes, I'm going to have the move e4. I have those beautiful central pawns, and I'm winning time. He has to go back, and then I win even more time. So I think that instead of taking with the knight, he wants to take with the queen, so that e4 is not possible. Yet I can still play knight c3. So the best case scenario that you can do, and what top 1% of chess players are doing, they are not just developing their pieces, they are trying to do it with a tempo. What that means? It means creating a threat to your opponent, so instead of developing his pieces, he needs to waste time to deal with your threat. That means a move with a tempo. You're basically winning time. And time, both in chess and in life, is the most precious resource. You don't want to waste any time. For example, pawn moves in the opening, you only make it if you want to fight for the center. You don't make those a3, h3 moves without any big necessity to do. Sometimes it's useful for you to cover some squares, but you never want to make those moves without a concrete reason. I also have an alternative of playing knight to c3, but okay, let me just take on d5. Don't make it too complicated for you. Playing normal, solid, simple chess is good enough if you want to join the top 1%. Okay, my opponent is trying to be tricky, which is great, because yeah, that knight on c6 wasn't really a good knight, and now he wants to relocate it all the way to d5, where it's going to be pretty good in the center. I respect that. What can I do about that? Well, not that much. Maybe I can play rook to e1, and then after knight takes d5, I can still play the move e4. So I want to play that e4 move possibly. When you are kind of finishing the opening and you're about to enter the middle game, the key thing is to realize your main plan, your general idea, what you want to achieve. Most of the players just don't care about that. They are just playing random moves, maybe developing their pieces, but they don't know what they want to do. And if you want to get to top 1%, you don't want to play aimlessly. You should find a powerful plan for yourself, which would make sense. For example, in this case, I have two, well, currently even three central pawns on the d and e file, whereas my opponent has only one. That means I should try to use that to my advantage, and of course the move e4 would be the best way to achieve that. That is why I'm playing rook to e1, which at the same time develops a new piece and prepares that e4 move, and that would be really great for me. I'm going to control the entire center. Unfortunately, my opponent is trying to stop me from doing that. He plays bishop f5, and now e4 square is under control, and he even creates a threat of his own. So the most crucial mistake that 99% of the chess players are making, they are not thinking about their opponent's threats. This is the key principle that you must remember. If you're going to remember just one thing out of this video, please take away this one. Never, ever think about your moves without thinking what your opponent can do in response. And whenever your opponent makes a move, try to understand this threat. And don't finish it with just one idea, like bishop f5, okay, he wants to stop my e4 move, that's it. No, maybe he also wants to do something besides that. And here he wants to play knight to c2, which is actually going to be very, very tricky. I mean, this is a fork, and I might potentially get in trouble. But actually, I should have thought about it when I played the move rook e1. But okay, it happens, not always you play perfect, that's completely fine. You still need to get away from it. So you think, okay, knight c2 is a threat. Do I have a way to deal with it? Yes, I can play knight to a3, and that would cover the c2 square. Yes, you'd normally want to put your pieces towards the center, so they're active, but sometimes, because of that threat, you need to go to the side. Okay, do I have any other options apart from knight h3? Do I have something more active? For example, creating that threat of knight h4 and attacking that bishop. Well, my opponent, his threat was to play knight c2, so I have to check that. I played knight xf5, that was my idea. Or actually, it's not even the only idea, but okay, let's start with that. That's the most active. Knight h4, he plays knight c2, I play knight xf5. Now, if he's just taking my knight back, I take his knight and I win a piece. So he has to take one of the rooks. Let's say the e1 rook, because that would also attack my bishop. And now if I take the bishop on g7 and he takes it back and I take his knight on e1, oh my god, it's way too complicated for you. I have already realized that. But anyway, I want to figure it out whether knight h4 makes sense. He takes there on e1 and he attacks my bishop. And my knight also doesn't really get away from there. So yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to be an exchange down in that position, which is not great. So knight h4, knight to c2. Maybe I have the move e4 now that I think about it, because I do have enough defenders, so if he takes on e4, I just take it with the rook. So the only move for him is once again knight takes e1, and unfortunately again seems like I'm an exchange down in that. So yeah, that is a real threat. So let me play knight h3 and just deal with it so that I don't get into trouble. And also I understand that knight h4 or e4, all of those ideas are very tricky. And if you're going to play it in your games, chances are you're not going to calculate everything correctly and get into trouble. That is why I try to make it simple enough for you. At the same time, we don't want to make only passive moves. We want to be active. We want to make great moves because we want to get into the top 1%. Top 1% are not afraid of making active moves and going forward. In fact, I would argue every single time you have a chance to make an active move, you can go forward, you can create a threat, please do that. Even if you lose this game, it's not that important, but you're going to learn so much more than if you're going to just stay and make those passive moves. Okay, he plays c6. He's actually not taking the d5 pawn. I can take it on c6, and that would be an extra pawn for me. So I'm not sure what his idea is. Seems like he's sacrificing. So I learned that Francis is a very aggressive guy. He wants to attack you. But if I see a free pawn that I can take, I mean, he cannot create any threats for me here. He just takes back. Then I'm doing that. And of course, in your games, so often your opponent is going to make some weird moves that you don't expect. That's completely normal, especially if you're below 2000 elo. He's not going to make all of the moves perfect. That's clear. And you need to take advantage of that. To do that, you always start with the most active opportunities, which are checks, captures, and threats. Always and always and always. Whenever you think about your opportunities, you start in this specific order. Why is that so important? Because if you don't do that, you are missing out on all of the best opportunities in the position. If you are gonna miss a very, very good chance potentially to win the game or to get a significant advantage, then 99% of the cases it's going to be either a check or a capture or a threat. That is why it's so essential. And you can use the same system not only to think about your moves, but also to calculate the opportunities for your opponents, like what he can do. Checks, captures, and threats. If he does not have any of those, then it's not that dangerous for you. If he cannot check you, capture something, or maybe attack your queen, which would be undesirable. Okay, so I have an extra pawn. I'm pretty happy with my position so far. Yes, my knight is not that perfect, but it can jump to c4 at every possible occasion, and then yeah, it's great again. So I don't really see a problem with that. I don't want to do it immediately because you remember our golden principle is one piece, one move. So we rather develop a new piece, in this case the bishop. Yeah, let's play bishop to. Yeah, there is one little thing that I'm not big fan of, like knight h5, and then the d4 pawn is going to be attacked many times. I can just play e3. That is a very solid move, making sure that I don't get in trouble, because the bishop on f4 can get into trouble, and this bishop is also great. So I would rather place my bishop somewhere on c3 maybe to defend everything. And enough on f4, I'm not sure it would be that great. But at the same time, I would be happy to play e4 because, like I said, it's gonna allow me to control the entire center. What do I do? How do I proceed from here? I can play knight c4, but then this knight b4 comes back, and yeah, once again, some attacking chances. Although I'm gonna have knight e3 there. Gonna attack his bishop and cover my c2 key square. Always want to make those double purpose moves. Not only to deal with your opponent's threats, but also make something useful for yourself. Yes, I do think that I'm gonna break this golden principle of one move, one piece, because I'm going forward, I'm making a very active move that is also very useful for myself. So the principle is never make a move, a second move with the same piece without a very, very good reason. Yet, if you are sure that it's a good move for you, if you feel that way, then of course, go for it. It just has to have a very, very good reason. In my case, the reason is I want to develop my pieces in the best possible ways, and to achieve that, I want to place my bishop on b2. So I'm gonna play the move b3. If he's gonna play b5, I have a beautiful spot for my knight on e5. I'm gonna block this entire diagonal, so it's not a big deal. And otherwise, yeah, if he plays that, and then I have bishop b2, so that I protect that key d4 pawn one more time. And I even support my potential jump with the knight later on with knight to e5, h5. Okay, he's doing something weird because instead of somehow finishing his development, he starts to make those pawn moves which I don't understand the purpose of. And I really want you to stop doing it in your games. Instead of making random pawn moves, try to bring all of your pieces into the game. I know it sounds very simple, but so many players don't do it. In fact, most of the players don't do it. Francis here is 2300 rated on chess.com, yet instead of bringing all of his pieces into the game, he plays h5 without any concrete benefit. So I'm immediately thinking if I can take advantage of that and play knight h4, attack that bishop, the bishop cannot get away, and then I'm gonna attack the knight and the bishop at the same time. I have to be careful with his response. So the golden principle here is never make a move unless you have thought about your opponent's response. So the knight on f3 is doing a very particular function of defending that pawn on d4. If I remove that, then the d4 pawn might be in trouble. What I can do about that is to play the move e3 and just protect the d4 one more time. What I like more, although, is just bringing a new piece. Exactly what I have just told you, instead of making pawn moves, if it's not really that useful or necessary, try to bring more of your pieces into the game. That is what I'm doing. e6. Okay, this bishop starts to look really weird. If I can make e4 possible one day, the bishop will just have no moves to go. Maybe I can jump with my knight. So now I have developed pretty much all of my pieces. Only the queen hasn't moved yet, but for now it shouldn't move. It doesn't have any good squares. At this point of time, the essential thing for you is to understand what is your plan. My plan is still to play in the center. How do you understand what you should do? Most of the players don't realize it, and then their plan is really poor, and as a result, they don't play a great game of chess. To realize what should be the right plan for you, you should find a place on the board where you are stronger. Typically, it's where you have more pieces, you have more pawns, or your opponent has more weaknesses, so you have some targets to attack. In this case, I have more pawns in the center, I am stronger in the center, I simply have an extra pawn, and my opponent has his kind of weird bishop on f5 and kind of vulnerable knight on f4. Yes, it stands very great, it's active, but if I can put pressure on it, then it might get into trouble. So I'm thinking about knight e5 here. That is the most powerful move. I'm going forward, I'm putting pressure on my opponent, I'm preparing that f3 idea, and I even block that diagonal so that d4 pawn is not in trouble. I have thought whether my opponent has something active, like he can take it, but that's never a problem for me. First of all, I have an extra pawn, so exchanging is overall fine for me. If you have more material, you're good with exchanging pieces. If you have less material, then you should avoid simple exchanging and instead trying to create initiative. So I'm playing knight to e5. I'm in the center, I'm very active and control a lot of space. Let's see what Francis is gonna do. Knight to b4. Okay, so that's exactly what I was talking about. He is a pawn down, so he's trying to create some counter. He's attacking, for example, this pawn on a2, which actually is annoying. I don't want to lose it just like that, because if my rook comes to a1 later on, he plays knight to c3. So you see the key pattern here, the key thinking system that you should apply. Whenever your opponent makes a move, you have to forget about all of your plans. Like I had this f3 plan, and yes, that might be still good, but for a second here, I have to completely forget about it and think about my opponent's ideas, what he wants to achieve with this move. Knight to b4. This one thing alone would save you from most of the blunders you make in all of your games. And of course, if you're gonna do that, you're gonna become immediately much stronger in chess, because most of the games you lose because you blunder something. And if you blunder something, it's either a check or a capture or a threat. In this case, is attacking the pawn. Now, I have acknowledged that I still want to start with the most active opportunities, which are checks, captures, and threats. I don't have any checks here. I can only capture this knight on a4, which is not great. I'm exchanging my bishop for a knight, and his bishop will be perfect. This video is brought to you by Chestnut. Chestnut is making amazing chessboards that allow you to play online from a real 3D board. They have high quality chessboards, nice looking chess pieces, so that you can enjoy and having fun playing it. Chestnut boards also have so many training functions that I absolutely love to use to my training, and it helps me to improve my chess every day. This is, for example, Chestnut Evo. I love to use it for my trainings, but they have so much to offer you depending on your preferences and your budget. And the best part is you can just use the promo code Journey to Grandmaster or click the link in the description to get a big discount on all of the Chestnut products. Although, now that I think about it, it's not that simple, because I still can continue with f3 and try to kick this bishop away. But okay, that's too fancy. We don't want to exchange our pieces like that. Our bishop is so beautiful, one of our best pieces. Instead, we either want to attack this knight on b4, or we want to attack that knight on e4 with the move f3. And we just need to decide which one is better. How to do that? Well, by process of calculation. So we make our move and we think what our opponent can do. f3. The knight is hanging. If the knight goes anywhere back, first of all, a move back is almost never a problem for us. And secondly, we are going to play e4, and that bishop literally has 0 moves to go. We are going to win. That means that by process of elimination, our opponent cannot afford that. He has to create a counter threat, which in this case can be knight takes a2. But now that I think of it, I can still just take the knight on e4. Even if he takes back on c1, I can take the bishop or take the knight. I'm going to have 2 pieces for a rook and a huge advantage. That seems to be great. But I also have to think about another opportunity, which is just a3, so that if he goes back, now I play f3, and without any counter threats, I just, it's like I'm winning a piece. Maybe he has some ideas like bishop h6, creating counter threats or something, but I just take the knight, I remove this most dangerous piece, and he doesn't have any ways to somehow create troubles for me. He takes on e5. Maybe that's gonna help him to somehow avoid losing a piece, but I doubt that, because he can take it back with a knight, for example. Yeah, maybe that helps a little bit. But just a little bit, because even if I play f3 and he takes the knight on e5, I can just take, so I continue with the most active opportunities. It's not checkers. If he takes my knight, I'm not obliged to take his bishop back. I can take the knight on e4, and then his bishop, both of his bishops are under attack. I think that f3 simply wins material. If I'm confident that I win material, then I basically don't need to think about anything else. I just go for it. Okay, he plays knight to g5 back. Now, very simple question. Okay, I realize now. And I have missed that initially, because it's such a weird structure somehow. Like he wants to get to h3, and that way he saves his bishop. If I play e4, he has bishop h3. But then I play f4, I win so much space. I mean, it's great for me in every case. That is why I'm not concerned about that. But now I can also start with the move a3, because if he plays to d5, which would be a desirable move for him, I have e4, I'm gonna fork 2 pieces and once again win a piece. Otherwise, he needs to go back, which is also great. So, and I'm not losing the pawn on a3. So a good rule of thumb is, if your position is great, you don't want to sacrifice him. You don't want to give unnecessary chances to your opponent. Okay, because Francis is so aggressive, he tries to create those threats. He plays knight a2, but that's such a weird move, which, by the way, can easily happen in your games. That's completely fine. You just need to react normally to it in the best available way for you. Your rook is hanging, you don't want to lose the rook, and this knight is weird. Basically, the only square I have here is a1, so I'm gonna do that. I anticipate the move b5 now to create a counter threat. Oh, he plays f6. Okay, that's another way to create a counter threat. And I like it about Francis. That's what you should do as well. If your position is bad objectively and you see that if you do nothing, then your opponent is gonna just crush you sooner or later. He's gonna come, he's gonna create those threats. You don't want to wait, you want to create your counterplay. Yes, maybe you will still lose, but at least you're gonna try, so you're gonna have chances. If you don't try, if you don't create threats, if you don't go crazy all in into the attack, then you don't get any chances at all. But you do that only if you're strategically worse. Like here, Francis is a pawn down, and I have the initiative, I control pretty much everything. That is why he desperately tries to create some attacking chances. Okay, I just can play knight to d3. Don't see any problems at all. This knight is still hanging. My knight is solid. d4 pawn is protected. He cannot create any checks, any captures. Like knight h3 is a check, but it's never a problem. Yes, b5 is the only threat I thought about. And it makes sense because if my knight goes away, he would be able to play knight c3, which actually would be a great move, as that would attack my queen, and he blocks the connection between the bishop and the d4 pawn, and then this queen might come there. Yeah, I actually like what he's doing, and at least his play makes some sense to me now. Okay, I guess I'm gonna take the a2 knight in that case. So I always start with the most active opportunities, checks, captures, and threats. I don't have any checks, and instead of going back with my knight, I rather would take his knight. He's gonna take my knight, I'm gonna take it back. Now he doesn't take the pawn back, then he's 2 pawns down, so rook takes, but now I still have that move e4, and I still push all of his pieces back. I thought, yeah, to say the least, I get so much time there. So, and time, remember, is so important in chess. I'm gonna go for it. Also, like I mentioned before, exchanges are in general good for me, but I also have an alternative. Taking the pawn is not the only move here. I can play knight to c5. The knight is great on c5. I prepare the move e4. I attack the pawn there. And if he takes on b3, I take it back with the queen. And I activate yet another piece. You remember, you want to develop all of your pieces into the attack. And that's also the most active opportunity. Given a choice, you always want to make the most active move that you have in the position. Takes here on b3. Yeah, I take back. Yes, the only thing I don't like, this rook on a2 is kind of weird, and I will need to spend a few tempi to deal with that. But for now, it should be fine. The rook is actually doing something useful. It protects my bishop, so my queen can go freely. I still want to play queen to c4, because this way I attack the e4 pawn and I pin the e4 pawn, so I'm threatening e4, and then I'm gonna exchange those pieces and basically win the pawn on e6. Okay, he cannot really stop it, that's why he is not doing it, but I can play e4. He's not... First of all, of course, I should forget about my e4 pawn move and think what is the threat he's creating, but I have everything protected, and e4 is a very direct threat. I don't see anything he can do, so I'm gonna go for it. Francis goes bishop to h3 because he does not really have any choice, and now I do have a choice. I can just play bishop takes h3, knight takes, that is a forcing line, so the first thing that you consider. Then I play king g2, I attack his knight, he has to go back, he cannot really defend it. And then I have f4 move, or h4 move. I continue in the same fashion, I continue to be as active as possible, then the knight has to go away, and then I win the e6 pawn. That plan feels to be simple enough. At the end of the day, I'm 2 pawns up, 2 central pawns, very important, and I still don't see any threats that Francis can create again. The alternative is to play bishop h1, but I like it less because it's a move back. Why would I do that? If I have an active alternative, I don't see anything wrong with it. I'm just going for it. I assume he's gonna take. What else can you do? No, what? He plays f5. Oh my god. I would have never expected that. But okay, at this point, people sometimes do some crazy things. I'm just happy to see that, and of course I need to take advantage of that. I don't want to lose my bishop there. if I can save it. So I'm playing bishop g2, and at the same time I'm protecting the pawn. So maybe Francis realized that if he's playing normally, he's taking that bishop back, he's losing that second pawn, and he does not have any initiative at all. So at least he tries to create a threat here. Maybe he's gonna jump with the knight, but okay. I'm pretty confident that I can deal with that. I'm playing pawn takes back. Let's see if Francis can create any threats for us. We still need to be careful because it's never too late to spoil your game. And actually, so many players are making this mistake, and that is why they are not in the top 1%. It's never too late to spoil the game. You have to follow your opponent's threats up until to the point he resigns. You have to stay focused, and every time your opponent makes a move, queen f7, you have to think, what is the threat? Because if I relax here just for one single moment, I'm gonna miss queen f2, check, and then I'm gonna just lose the game. It's going to be checkmate in a few moves. Imagine how cool it would be to play chess without ever having opening troubles again. What if I told you I could teach you all openings you will ever need in just 10 days? You get lifetime access to more than 110 pure value video tutorials, almost 100 practical tasks to apply your knowledge immediately into practice, 30 plus bonus videos to dive 10 times deeper, as well as private community where all questions you might ever have are answered daily. Get a $200 limited time discount with the link in the description, and forget about all opening pain once and for all. So, please remember, checks, captures, threats always start with this order, because if you're gonna miss something dangerous, it's going to be one of those things. And queen f2 is indeed a horribly strong check that I don't want to be. At the same time, I don't see anything wrong with just rook to f1. That would allow me to maybe exchange even more stuff. The rook is well protected, he does not have any checks, any reasonable ones at least. So I go for it. He plays queen to e7. What do I do here? Yeah, I would be happy to play rook a1 to connect the rooks again and to exchange, because at this point I have a lot of extra material, and the only chance for my opponent is to create some madness on the board. And yeah, my king is a little bit exposed. So the more pieces I exchange, the simpler it is for me to deal with his threats. But currently I cannot play rook a1 because the bishop on b2 is hanging. What can I do instead? I do have maybe some fancy moves like knight takes a6, trying to take advantage of that pin, but that's all absolutely not necessary. If you have a lot of extra material, you don't need to take the risk, and all you need to do is just stabilize and make sure you don't miss any dangerous counterplay. So yeah, he kind of wants to take here on f1, then bring the second rook. That might be dangerous. What can I do about that? Maybe I can play bishop c3, so that I connect my rook and it's ready to go to the second rank, and the rook is in general free to go. Yes, I weaken the b file, but as long as I'm ready to take with the queen back, I'm gonna be able to play rook b2 next, and then yeah, I'm gonna solve my problem. So I acknowledge my opponent's idea, I have thought about the best way to deal with it, and I'm going for it. So be very, very careful with your opponent's ideas. The most crucial mistake that 99% of chess players are doing is thinking that they play alone. And that's also the mistake that most of my students are making. They are thinking about their plans. Like, I want to move my queen here because I want to attack there, because I want to create this threat. And that's already good that they think about active moves, not about some passive ideas, how to stay in the defense. But they're missing this massive, massive thing, which is opponent's counterplay. It's so crucial. Once you understand that, you are immediately becoming so much stronger in chess. For example, queen to d6. I have to forget about all of my plans and think, what is the idea of that move? And of course, it's to attack the d4 pawn, which is more than pawn, because then I'm going to lose my knight as well. I have to be careful with that. I like to remaneuver my rook to d2, because it had no job there. Remember, you don't want any unemployment going on in your camp, so that is why the rook is now doing a useful function. All of my pieces are having a job, doing something useful for myself. Okay, queen c4 was my initial idea, but now I recognize this knight f3 move. So the golden principle is never make a move unless you think about your opponent's response. Just make it your golden rule, and you're going to avoid so many of your mistakes. knight f3 is a check. It does not necessarily mean it's bad for me. I just need to acknowledge that and think whether it's dangerous. Actually, I think it's not, because I'm gonna just exchange. Exchanging is good for me if I have an extra piece. And then the e6 pawn would also be hanging, which is also great. So yeah, I'm gonna do that. Because now I also want to play the move e5. Now that the knight is protected, I could not have done it before because the knight on c5 is hanging. And I know that because I have thought about my opponent's opportunities. But now, since the knight is protected, that's going to be possible. Okay, my opponent creates yet another threat. He wants to play rook b1 now, gets to my back rank and creates problems for my king. Even though I am having an extra piece, I can still easily get into trouble. And of course, I would bet that happens so often in your games, so please don't fall for this trick. He threatens that check, I can easily just deal with that check, rook d1, everything is rock solid, and then e5 is not gonna get away from me. I'm gonna play it next move once I'm perfectly ready. Although now I realize another problem, yeah, I actually cannot play e5 because my rook is hanging. So always and always you analyze what has changed in the position and why it's so important. Rook to d1, yes, I cover the back rank, but the rook is not protected anymore. So actually the best thing for me in this position is just to exchange the queens. This way I avoid all of the troubles. Without the queens, your opponent has almost zero chances to give you a checkmate, and it's so much simpler for you to convert your material advantage into a full point. How can I achieve that? Well, I see here the move queen to a6. I don't make it immediately. I have to think about it whether it's possible. First, checks, captures, and threads. So bishop takes d4 feels like a very dangerous check, but I can just take it with the bishop and I don't see any follow-up. Then he can play bishop takes g3, trying to create those threats, but in the worst case scenario, I can just take it on d6. I have so much material that I don't care about one pawn as long as I achieve my main goal, like changing the queens. If he plays rook b6 to stop it, then I get to c8, I get to even some checks, and then queen d7 would change the queens. If he takes, I take it back with the knight, I attack the bishop, the rook, that is perfect. So yeah, I don't see any active opportunities for Francis. That's why I am playing the move a queen to a6, trying to exchange. Yeah, he does go for bishop g3 because he's an attacking guy. Now you have a choice. You have a choice between taking back the bishop, and you're gonna have two extra pieces. But your opponent is gonna create those dangerous threats. Knight f3 check would be possible, knight h3 check would be possible. That would be crazy. And given a choice, you don't want to get into such a situation. You still have an extra piece, that's more than enough. So all you need to do is exchange the queens, and potentially you are in time travel in such a situation and you don't want to take an additional risk if your position is such a great one. Of course he takes back, doesn't really have any choice, and now finally I guess it's time for me to play e5. It's a very active move, I get even more space, I activate my bishop along this long diagonal, and if he wants to take, which he does, then I exchange even more pieces that helps me to convert my advantage. Now, once we get into the endgame, very important detail that so many players are forgetting, which does not allow them to join the elite, the top 1% of chess players, they don't shift their perspective. The way chess works in the middle game is so different from the way it works in the endgame. In the middle game, it's much more about tactics, about calculating those concrete variations. I'm attacking you here, I'm creating these threads to give a checkmate to win the queen, and you are attacking on the opposite side, and who is going to be the first one, and so on. In the endgame, it's much more about strategical ideas, about long-term plans. So once the queens are off the board, if you have a minute or two, or if your opponent is thinking, you need to acknowledge this fact. Okay, now we are entering the endgame. You need to shift your perspective. You need to change your mindset into those long-term ideas. For example, for me, the long-term idea is just to promote my pawn. So I'm just thinking, okay, how can I achieve that? Well, first of all, that works for the entire game from move 1 till the final checkmate. Whenever your opponent makes a move, try to understand what is this threat. That is attacking this bishop, but I can simply play bishop b4, everything is protected, and it helps me to continue my main idea, which is to promote that pawn. Okay, he creates yet another threat. I don't want anything fancy like calculating that c6 move. Yes, of course, it's winning as well, but you don't want to take unnecessary risks. You don't want to sacrifice anything when your position is great. If you can simply take the pawn, exchange those pawns, and now this pawn simply goes forward, it's basically unstoppable, then you don't even need to think about anything. Okay, knight h3, he is giving me a check. I'm always happy. I'm a simple guy. I have an extra material. I'm happy to exchange stuff. Come on, let's take. And now all I want to do is put my rook behind the passer. Please remember this advice for the next 50 years of your chess career. You always want to put your rook behind the passed pawn. And it doesn't matter if it's your pawn or your opponent's pawn. In every case, always put your rook behind the pawn, not in front of it. Why? Why is so important? Because the longer my pawn goes forward, the more active my rook becomes, and also the rook doesn't stand in front of the pawn, so it doesn't stop it. This way my rook is getting more and more active, instead of vice versa. If my rook would be on c8, it gets less and less squares to go, gets less active, so it's not gonna work. And that is what I'm doing. Okay, now my opponent is blocking my pawn, so I cannot really promote it immediately. And yes, I have some fancy ideas like bishop d8, then come in with rook, but I want to share with you this key principle that so many players forget, and that is why they cannot join the top 1%, because they are missing those victories in the endgame. The key principle is to understand the activity, the importance of the activity of your king. In the endgame, it changes its role significantly. In the opening and middle game, you are just trying to make sure that it's secure, it cannot get into trouble. But in the endgame, it changes hugely, because now you want your king to be active, you want it to become a warrior, to actually go himself into the attack and beat your opponent. Okay, he plays king to d7. Just to illustrate the point, I'm completely fine with further exchanging the pieces, because I have an extra bishop, and I'm gonna create a passer. Okay, my opponent takes. Yes, I could have played bishop d8 if that was your intention, absolutely fine with that. But that is the simplest way for me, because the more pieces I exchange, the simpler it is to convert the advantage. Now I just take this g6 pawn. Then in the endgame, of course, you want to create passers. The passers is a way to win the game, because you promote the queen to give a checkmate. That's exactly what I'm doing. I also want to block that king so it can never stop my pawn, and then the pawn is free to go into the queen. Let me make the last moves very, very fast to make a final conclusion so that you can take the most out of this. Even if it's the very end of the game and you're about to deliver a checkmate, you still want to use as many pieces as possible. That is the key to success in all parts of the game. You want all of your pieces to be working and participate in the game, and especially in the attack. Alright, we finally have delivered the checkmate, so what you need to remember is that there are 3 different parts of the game. You need to think differently about those. The opening is where you prepare for the game, you build the foundation, you develop all of your pieces, and you're ready for a real fight. In the middle game, you need a very clear plan of what you want to achieve, a general idea that you stick all of your moves to. And then when you transition to the end game, you must shift your perspective. You must stop for a second and think, okay, now I cannot get checkmated. I need to think long term in terms of how can I create a passer and promote the pawn. And I need to activate my king, because the king is so important in the end game. And throughout the whole game, the best thing you can do is whenever your opponent makes a move, forget about all of your ideas, and think for a second what he or she wants to achieve. What is the point of this move? And whenever you are about to make a move, try to think, okay, what's going to happen next? What could be my opponent's response? If you follow these rules, I guarantee you're going to immediately become so much stronger in chess. The crucial part of this whole system to work is, of course, finding the right plan for the game. To help you with that, I've created this video where I share a detailed step-by-step system of how you can get the right plan to actually crush your opponent.